Diabolic, Elon, I, the Tetragrammaton, the Lord God Most High, I do exercise thee, and do powerfully command thee, O Spirit. Elon, I, the Tetragrammaton, the Lord God Most High, I do exercise thee, and do powerfully command.
In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Abracast. I'm your host, John Towers. So here we are again. This evening, I have my vessel of the art and the weapon of mass distraction called the Jin Jihad. We're going to start off this evening talking about the distinctions between white and black magic, and this is something that we've kind of talked about before, specifically when we were talking about Goetic books such as the Lesser and the Greater Keys of Solomon. In the Greater Key of Solomon, the Clavicula Solomonis, the McGregor Mathers translation from 1888, he, inside the Greater Key, they roughly dispel out what they think determines black magic versus white magic. And if memory serves me correctly, it's if you're causing pain or using blood, specifically of animal, I suppose. Probably of a person, though, too. It comes about in a passage using, where they're talking about piercing the wing of a bird to obtain its blood, and McGregor Mathers, serves as the translator and the editor for the copy, made an editor's note saying, stay away from this part because this is black magic. So, like I said, we're going to start the evening talking about the distinction between white and black magic. We're going to be reading from the book of Ceremonial Magic, including the rites and mysteries of the Goetic theurgy, sorcery, and infernal necromancy. This one's by Arthur Edward Waite. So without further ado, let me lube up here and we can get going. Having considered the possible standpoints from which the rituals may be regarded, we come now to the distinctions that are made between them, and first and foremost to that which has already been mentioned and is artificially instituted between white and black magic. The history of the distinction is exceedingly obscure. But there can be no question that in its main aspect it is modern, that is to say, insofar as depends upon a sharp contrast between good and evil spirits. In Egypt or India and in Greece, there was no dealing with devils in the Christian sense of the expression. Typhon, judgment, and Hecate We're not less divine than the gods of the overworld and of the offices of Candia were probably in their way as sacred as the peaceful mysteries of Circes. Each of the occult sciences was, however, liable to that species of abuse, which is technically, but fantastically known as black magic. Astrology, or the appreciation of the celestial influences and their operations upon the nature and life of man, could be perverted in the composition or the malefic talisman by the means of those influences. Esoteric medicine, which consisted in the application of occult forces to be the healing of disease in man, and included a traditional knowledge of the medicinal properties resident in some substances disregarded by ordinary pharmacy, produced in its malpractice the secret science of poisoning and the destruction of health, reason, or life by unseen forces. The transmutation of metals by alchemy resulted in their sophistication. In like manner, divination, or the process by which lucidity was supposed to be induced, became debased into various forms of witchcraft and ceremonial magic. In dealing with devils, Waite ceremonial magic is, by the terms of its definition, an attempt to communicate with good spirits for good, or at least an innocent purpose, and black magic is the attempt to communicate with evil spirits for an evil or for any purpose. The contrast here established seems on the surface perfectly clear. When it comes, however, to compare the ceremonial literature of the two classes, we shall find the distinction is by no means so sharp as might be inferred from the definitions. In the first place, the so-called theurgic ceremonial, under the pretense of white magic, usually includes the rites for the evocation of evil spirits, supposing that they are so invoked for the enforced performance of works contrary to their nature. The issue becomes complicated at once. The white magician must then be defined as the attempt to communicate with good or evil spirits for a good or at least for an innocent purpose. This, of course, still leaves a tolerably clear distinction, though not one that I should admit, if I admitted to the practical side of the entire subject, to anything but unconditional condemnation. Yet the alternative between a good and an innocent object contains all the materials for further confusion. It will be made clear as I proceed that the purposes and ambitions of magic are commonly very childish, so that we must distinguish really between black and white magic, not as between the essentially good or evil, but as between that which is certainly evil and that which may only be foolish. Nor does this exhaust the difficulty, as will also be made evident in proceeding. White ceremonial magic seems to admit a number of intentions which are objectionable, as well as many that are frivolous. Hence, it must be inferred that there is no sharp distinction between the two branches of the art. Cannot be said even the black magic is invariably and the white magic occasionally evil. What is called black magic is by no means diabolical. Invariably, it is almost as much concerned with the preposterous and the stupid procession as the white variety, with those of an accursed kind. Thus, the most which can be stated is that the literature falls chiefly into two classes, one of which usually terms itself black, but that they overlap one another. In what perhaps is it may be permissible to call the mind of magic as distinct from the effects which are produced by the rituals. There has been always a tolerable contrast between the two branches, corresponding to the magus and sorcerer, and the fact that the ceremonial literature tends to the confusion of the distinction may perhaps only stamp it as garbled. But this is not to say that it has been tampered with in the sense of having been perverted by editors. White magic has not usually been written down into black. Goetic rituals have not been written up into pseudo-celestial terms. They are, for the most part, naturally composite. And it would be impossible to separate their elements without modifying their structure. Modern occultism has taken up the clear distinction and developed it, appealing to the secret traditional knowledge behind the written word of magic, to the unmanifested science, which it believes to exist behind all science, and to the religion behind all religions. As if the two were related or identical, it affirms that the advanced occult life has been entered by two classes of adepts who have been sometimes fantastically distinguished as brothers of the right and brothers of the left. Transcendental good and transcendental evil being specified as their respective ends. In each case, they are something altogether different from what is understood conventionally by either white or black magic. As might be expected, the literature of the subject does not bear out this development, but by the terms of the proposition, this is scarcely to be regarded as an objection. For the rest, if many rumors and a few questionable revelations must lead us to concede within certain limits that there may have been some recrudescences of diabolism in more than one country of Europe. Some attempt at the present day to communicate formally with the powers of darkness. It must be said that this attempt returns in its old likeness and not invested with the sublimities and terrors of the modern view. Parisian diabolism, for example, insofar as it might be admitted to exist, is the black magic of the grimoire, and not a sovereign horror of the brothers of the left-hand path, wearing their inequity like a aureole, and deathless in spiritual evil. These enigmatical personages are, however, the creation of romance, as are also their exalted, or at least purified, confresses. Between Rosicrucian initiates of the astral process and the Amortores Diaboli, there is indubitably the bond of union which arises from one fact. Here we go. Il n'y a pas des gens plus embêtants que ces gens-là, which roughly translates means there are no more annoying people than these people. The unprinted literature of ceremonial magic for the purposes of the present inquiry. It will be convenient to consider the rituals under the three heads of transcendental, composite, and black subjects as regards the first to some specific qualifications which will appear to the second chapter and subject in respect of all to the perfect understanding that these three are one, so far as many be possible. The antiquity of individual rituals will be determined in the course of their examination. But as this inquiry is based, with a single exception of undeniable importance, upon the printed literature because it is the only which has exercised a real influence, it may be well, as a conclusion to this introductory part, to give some information regarding magical process which have remained in the manuscript, are to be found only, or can at least be consulted only, in the public libraries of Europe. Almost without exception, the source of their inspiration is the work mentioned, namely the Key of Solomon. And they are consequently of later date. The Library of Arsenal at Paris has a reputation for being especially rich in the magical. There is also a large collection in the British Museum, which may be regarded as typical. There is nothing of earlier date or more importance among the French treasures. And to determine the question of antiquity in a few words, there is nothing among our own that is much anterior to the beginning of the 14th century. The numerical strength of the treatises, late and early combined, is in itself considerable, but setting aside the codices made of use by the English editor of the Key of Solomon, the interest of which was exhausted long since by the appearance of that work, there are only 3 small classes or cycles to which a special appeal attaches to the connection with the present inquiry. The first may be termed the group of honorists, comprising 3. The second is that the Sefer Raziel, of which there are 2 forms, and the third includes the English codices of the Lemegeton. So the Lemegeton is just another word for the Lesser Key of Solomon. So in this instance, the Key of Solomon is referring to the Greater Key of Solomon, which I talked about at the very top of the episode. The chief MS of the first group is also one of the most ancient treatises dealing with the magic in the library. This is Sloane 313, a Latin manuscript on vellum. Its bad state of preservation, close writing and abbreviations make it somewhat difficult to read. It is interesting, however, because it connects with the grimoire of Onorus, one of the most historical and notable rituals of black magic. Being the work of some person bearing that name, it belongs to the 14th century and has no title or other determinate name. But it appears from the text that it is understood to be the sworn Book of Onorus. The introduction or prologue to the work is obscurely worded in the initial pages, and it seems to account for the condemnation of magic and by the prelates of the church on the grounds that they have been deceived by demons. The result is the convocation of all the masters of magic, the number of 811, all of whom seem to have come out of Naples, Athens, and a place entitled Tholetus. Among these species of spokesmen were chosen whose name was Onorus, the son of Euclidius, master of the Thebans, and he was deputed to work for the rest, and he entered into the council with the angel he called Hakamel, or Hakarel, or Hakamel, and thereafter wrote 7 volumes of magical art, giving the kernel to us and the shells of the others. From these books he seemed afterwards to have extracted 93 chapters containing a summary of the whole subject and made them into a volume which we term the Sacred or Sworn Book. In the meantime, the princes and the prelates, having burned certain fables or trifles, concluded that they had completely destroyed the art. and were therefore pacified. The magicians, however, took an oath among themselves to preserve the masterpiece of Onerus in the most secret and careful manner by making 3 copies, at the most the possessor of any example being bound over to bury it before his decease, or otherwise ensure its interment in his own grave, unless there were some trusty or worthy person who could it could be transmitted. It is interesting to note that in the law of transmission in respect to alchemy, the important point about this manuscript itself is that it fixes the source of the mendacious tradition which ascribes a grimoire of black magic to a pope of the name of Onerus. As will be seen at length later on, the sworn book is not, of course, the grimoire, but his existence and reputed authorship of one will enable us to understand the attribution of the other Onerus. The sorcerer was identified with Onerus the Pope, firstly, by the confused mind of magical legend, and secondly, by a conscious imposture, much after the same manner that Raymond Lully, the illuminated doctor of Majorca, was identified with Lully the alchemist by tradition at the inception, and not long afterwards by the help of forged treatises. The sworn book is in other respects remarkable. It has been accountably overlooked by writers on ceremonial magic, and may be taken to indicate that an association of magicians was most probably in corporate existence during or before the 14th century. While it is clearly the Christian origin, it derives from the supposed work of Solomon and would appear to indicate that the Solomonic cycle was at that time only in course of formation, and was also that the earliest elements approximate not to the grand clavicle, but to the elements approximate, but to the little key, otherwise the lemegeton. As to the operation contained in the sworn book, they are those of white and black magic, undiscriminated, without, however, any trace of the conventional dealing with the devil. The manuscript under notice need not, of course, be regarded as the original, as there is no means of knowing. The British Museum possesses also a later transcript belonging to the 16th century, and a most valuable English translation written on vellum in beautiful Gothic characters. It is referred to the 15th century. The second group compromises of 2 manuscripts, both in the Sloane collection and both containing, among other treatises, the important and curious work attributed to Solomon under the title of Sefer Raziel, that numbered 3826, belonging to the 16th century. It is an English translation of a Latin original, which in this form is known to myself. The first line of the original is given. The beginning of each section is divided into 7 books and purports to have been sent to Solomon by the province of Babylon, who was greater and more worshipful than all men of his time, his name being Samatin. Well, the 2 wise men brought it were called Camazan and Zazant. The Latin title of the treatise is said to be Angelus Magnus Secretari Creatoris. And it was the first book after Adam was written in the language of Chaldea, and afterwards was translated into Hebrew. It was a noticeable fact that in this work, the first section entitled Clavis, and if we may regard the Sefer Raziel as antedating the Clavicella, It explains why the key was attributed to Solomon. The clavis in question is, however, concerned with the magical influence of the stars, without which they can affect nothing. The second book is called Alla, A-L-A. It treats of the virtuous of stones, herbs, and beasts. And the third book is called the Tractatus Thymaimatum, which term connects it to the sworn book of Onerus. It treats of suffumigations. The fourth set out the time of the year, the days, and the nights which are disposed of operations. The fifth embodies the law regarding lusterations and abstinence, while the sixth is called Samium. Expounds the nature of the heavens, of the angels, and of the operations of each. The seventh and last book is concerned with the virtues of names. A Latin version of Saphiraziel occurs in the Sloan manuscript 3853, ascribed to the same period, and it differs from the former in several considerable respects, being also much shorter and full of rare magic symbols. The manuscripts of the third group are all in English and all of late date. Sloan 2731 is a very neat manuscript. Began on January 10th, 1676, and containing the entire Lesser Key of Solomon in English, and the account of this celebrated work, which has so unaccountably escaped publication, will be found in the third chapter of this part. Sloan 3648 is another manuscript of the Lemegeton, also in English, together with the Ars Notoria, the book of invocations and prayers attributed to Solomon, of which there are many examples extant in England and on the continent. It is a work which connects with magic without being itself magical, and in fact stands in much of the same relation to the key or clavicelli as the Enchiridion of Pope Leo to the Osirage of the Arbital. Lastly, the same manuscript contains the magical archdiocese of Paracelsus, and the version seems to be quite distinct from the treatises so entitled in the Geneva Folio, containing the collected writings of the German adept. In either case, it is not a work of ceremonial magic. It is a title notwithstanding. Sloan 3805 is the quarto manuscript, chiefly alchemical and medicinal, comprising of translation of the forged apostles of Sendovigius, and towards the end of the Lemegeton, started by the writer apparently with the intention of transcribing all the works attributed to Solomon under the headings of this angelic name. So hold on, I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to translate this. The Isagog of the Arbital. I don't know what the Isagog part is, but an Arbital it's kind of like a replacement angel. It's like a human that does the work of an angel. It's like a substitute angel. Let me see if I can think of a way to better unpack that idea. So I used to deal with Arbital, this idea of the Arbital in my comics and graphic novels. We kind of got away from it in this narrative, the storyline. But the way that I always thought of it could be like, during Raiders of the Lost Ark, instead of sending down an angel or two to deal with reclaiming the Ark. You know, God, Yahweh, the master of the universe and the ages upon the ages. Can I get an amen? Kind of chose Indiana Jones to be act as a substitute angel to reclaim the Ark from the Nazis. So that's just a quick aside. I just thought that was interesting, and I didn't expect that to pop up in this at all. So, yeah. I gotta find my fucking spot back now. Alright, so this guy he's gonna copy down all of the works attributed to Solomon under this angelic name. It breaks off, however, at the end of the offices of the 13th spirit belonging to the infernal hierarchy. It should be added that these three groups contain materials which are common to all. The independent treatises which follow the Sefer Raziel and Sloan 3826 extract matter from the sworn book, while that entitled Liber Lunae concerning the intelligence of the mansions of the moon, and then the squares of the planets and their seals and their rings and so forth, which, by the way, seen in this form unknown to modern critics, has given material to the other and later collections. Well, since my brain is now open to all this angelic stuff that I know that I've researched for ever and ever and ever, this Sefer Raziel, Raziel in Jewish tradition, the archangel Raziel was he was in charge of writing down the history of time or whatever, in the Book of the Ages or whatever it could have been. This unprinted literature of ceremonial magic offers a considerable field of research through even in the historical or bibliographical interest. It is questionable whether it would repay the pains unless research of all kinds whatsoever is to be regarded as its own reward. Among the miscellaneous manuscripts in the British Museum, it is here only necessary to notice two. They contain materials connected with the present design. Sloan 3884 includes a process in necromancy. How to call the ghost of a dead body, the invocation of spirits into a crystal, and the forms of summoning spirits within the circle, and a method of exorcism in the Tuscan language, all impudently attributed to the author of Nullity of Magic, that is to say, Roger Bacon. In the second part of my present work, a special chapter is devoted to infernal necromancy, and the manuscript here mentioned will be a useful purpose for reference. Sloan 3850 is a manuscript of the 7th century, which contains transcripts of the 4th book of Cornelius Agrippa, and from the Heptameron of Peter di Abano in Latin. There is also good improved experiment for evocation, which uses Pater Ave, Credo, and Litany of the Saints as a magical formula. Finally, there are processes, mostly in Latin, but some in English, for the discovery of things lost and the recovery of things stolen, for the spirits of the dead who cannot rest in their graves, and for persons possessed by evil spirits. The treatises De Novum Cardeceris Salomanis, containing curious figures and sigils, deserves particular mention, as this again seems unknown to students. Its attribution notwithstanding is a work of a Catholic writer. So I ran out of text here, but instead of diving headlong here only for the last half, getting into the rituals of transcendental magic, which is where we're going next, specifically the orbital of magic. I figure we can Don't worry, I'm prepared. I've prepared for this. We're gonna go back into the Waite's introduction of the Book of Ceremonial Magic, and just we're going to add some context to this idea of white magic and black magic here. So, here we go. So in the introduction here, Waite is talking about sort of the secret traditions, I guess you would say, of ceremonial magic, and he's stating, talking about Christian metaphysics, the mystic tradition of Christians, and then he also goes on to talk about the Kabbalah, and he talks about alchemy, and then here I'll dive into it. By the way, those three topics episodes about all three of those topics can be found at Abracast.com. If you go to the featured topic link, you can certainly find plenty of Kabbalah and episodes about alchemy, as well as, Christian tradition stuff. All right, diving into it. There is a door in the soul which opens on God. So there is another door which opens on the recremental deeps. There is no doubt that the deeps come in when it is opened effectually. There is also the powers of the abyss, and this is why it has been worthwhile to look at the subject seriously. Being thankful to say that I am, and hoping under God to continue without first-hand experience in these departments, it must be understood that I speak here under the reserves of derived knowledge. It should, I think, be understood that there is no sublimity in those deeps. There is the cesspool of spiritual life in the pit of the second death. Their powers are those of the pest house. They are remote from the somber terrors and splendors of Dante's Inferno, as are the gold bars of heaven and the stars and lilies for the blessed Demoiselle, far and how far away from the vision and the union. There is no especial reason to suppose that there is a black sanctuary, a hidden church of hell open to Christians. But there may be, and in the analogy, it would seem that there must be a communion of self-lost souls, as there is a communion of saints. I should imagine that the lords of its convention are to be feared in a certain manner, like the Red and the Black Death, but the Versailles and aspirations of formula, which must be strong enough at any moment to undo all the gates of hell and cast down all its citadels, have been taught us almost at our mother's knees. It should think that the noctum quietum a finum perfectum consiedat nobis dominus omnipotence would be sufficient to disperse cohorts, and not the isolated negatum preambulanis and tenebris. Okay, so what that Latin is a dead language, as you know. So noctum quietus infinitum perfectum consciat nobis dominus omnipotens is, may the Lord Almighty grant us quiet night and a perfect end. And negotium et perambulis in tenebris means business and going through the dark. Negotiating and going through the dark, perhaps. So here, I should think that the may the Lord Almighty grant us quiet night and a perfect end would be sufficient to disperse cohorts and not the isolated negotiation and going through the dark. The Paternoster, moreover, is worthy of the golden verses of Pythagoras, all the commentary of Heracles, and every oracle of Zoroaster, including the forged citations. Paternoster just means father of us all. And in fine, I do not think that there is any power of the abyss, any thrice great magus, or any sorcerer and final impenitence who has charm, talisman, or conjuration which could look in the face without perishing that one loving supplication. Custodi nos domine e pepulum oculi, sub umbra alarnum terram prodige nos. Which means, protect us, Lord, protect us like the apple of your eye, under the shadow of your wings. It is improbable that there is any hidden science in respect of magic, whether black or white. It should be noticed that the occult sciences with which I am concerned here are reducible under this special head, and as it is the greater which includes the lesser. Its process lie on the surface, and the so-called sanctuaries of occultism may extend to the codices, but are unlikely to increase the efficacy. In respect to black magic, so far as there is a textual excuse for separating it from the uterine sister, which is reared from the same milk, I've indicated that there is nothing to suggest one touch of sublimity in diabolism, in its, so to speak, pure state, but ipsis verbum, I should rather have said undiluted. It is the simple ambition and attempt to compel demons to observe here that it is Satanism to deal ex hypothetici with the abyss for whatever purpose. In its worst state, it is the grimoires and the little books of wicked and ultra-foolish secrets. The difference between the Grimorum Vernum and the Key of Solomon is that one deals openly with the devils and his emissaries, and the other with spirits that are obviously of the same category, but are saluted by more kindly names. If it were possible to formulate the motive of black magic in terms of imputated transcendence, it is the hunger and the thirst of the soul, seeking to satisfy its cravings, the ash pits, the uncleanliness, the greed, the hatred, the malice. It is exactly comparable to the life of the Coronauer, the mysteries of Paris, who lived upon deceased offal and grew to be satisfied therewith. But this unfortunate could not help himself exactly, while the souls of the black magician has usually sought evil for its own sake. I recur therefore for a moment to the door of the soul, which, as I have said, opens on God. And it is that which, by necessary but somewhat arbitrary distinction, must be called the door to the heights. In their proper understanding, the deeps are holy as the heights. And of course, in any true philosophical sense, there is neither height nor depth. For these are not the journeys to be made in space and time. However, that symbolic door is the golden way of satisfaction. It is not magic of divination, of clairvoyance, of the communion with the spirits of what order soever. It does not offer the fabled power over nature, which of the magus is said to be in search, and in which lying rituals have from all time pretended he can attain. It is the hunger and the thirst after sanctity, and of overfilling of the soul therewith. The word clairvoyance brings me to the last point, and to the third distinction which I have promised to mention. The office of occultism is, of course, comparable to the empirical science of the psychic side of things, which is being followed in the present day with circumspection and keenness all over Europe and America. It is a poor compliment and one way to institute the comparison, because that which has passed through the embellics of occultism is the dregs and the lees of thought, intelligence, motive, and of all that goes to make up the side of action in man. Psychical research, on the other hand, has throughout been actuated by an honorable, often by pious motive. It is adopted a scientific method so far as the subject would permit, but has forth no claims and abides judgment by results. It is, of course, from my point of view, that very far from term. I do not believe for one moment that anything responds to its methods from the unseen side of things, which can bring good to man by the intercourse. But it has to be remembered that every supermundane or abnormal fact which is registered by this kind of research is so much evidence added to the dossier of occult science. If the phenomenon of psychicism or psychical research has registered by the old processes of magic, may be unquestionably verdict processed within their own lines. They did not put the operator in communion with the highest supposition, with Raphael, Gabriel, Uriel, or with Astaroth and Belial, or Lucifer on the lowest. Any more psychical research in spiritualism has ever established intercourse with the souls of the faithfully departed. Both have produced an extraordinary pathological condition on the phenomenon of the soul manifesting. The distinction between the two methods is that one is usually the result of personally induced hallucinations, complicated by the infrequent interventions, the abnormal psychic facts, the whole following a more or less manic ceremonial, while the other is a scientific investigation of similar and illogical state or predisposed subjects whom the operator may seek to control. I have no reason to suppose that a sober, ordered, and well-judged method of such experimental research will succeed in taking the place as subject of any grade of certitude, which will be a permanent value of man. The question closes here so far as I'm concerned. The indication, such as they are, gather rather on the other side, the path of certitude, the inward man, as it stands to all reason that it must be. If God and his kingdom are within, there is thus, on the best and the most temperate hypothesis, no object in going forward any other direction thither wherein all contained the all. Two things now remain to be said, and it will be seen in the first place that from this part of the secret tradition in Christian times, the summary of the details which I have opened the present conference, there could have never been any derivation to occult traditions and so-called occult sciences. In the second place, the work which therefore and now follows shall permit the rituals of the white and black magic to speak for themselves as to the tradition therein and its value. So, if you tuned in for any length of time for these episodes, whether we were talking about the Goetia or ceremonial magic or the Kabbalah or alchemy or Gnosis, the Gnostics, I think what Waite is saying here towards the end of this introduction, a way that what he's saying can be interpreted is, that these things speak to the inner man or woman or whatever. It's magic as psychology, the occult as psychology, which you might know by now that I'm a big believer in. It's the self-help, for weirdos. Anyhow, I'm John. I'm not going to belabor the point very much. The last ceremonial magic episode we did, I kind of went off the rails there at the end, talking about creative play and action figures and pop magic and all this other kind of stuff. So I just kind of want to leave it at that. That part of the introduction really spoke to me, especially there towards the end, where he's saying that it reminds me of Crowley's translation of the Lesser Key of Solomon. In the introduction, he says something along the lines of the demons of Solomon are aspects of the human mind, or something like that. It's very close to that, if it's not that. And that's kind of where I hang my hat on this kind of stuff. But that's not to say that it's bullshit, and it's not to say that it's meaningless. I think it's meaningful, and I think in this world that we're living in now, where this occultism and witch talk and all of this stuff, Facebook has commercials now about occultists and astrology. It's so crazy, but it's obvious that there is a need for this kind of stuff. And I guess the hill that I'm dying on, and one of the reasons that I chose to read the chapter that we read tonight about the unpublished sources of ceremonial magic, it's right in the tagline of the show. It's right in the oath that Hilla reads at the beginning of every episode. We read the old books. Where fearlessly we search for knowledge, new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. So, it's not bullshit. And I think a lot of stuff that witch talk and Instagram magicians, as I think that there's a sort of anti-intellectualism about it, where they're not doing. I don't know. I feel like I'm on a soapbox. That's certainly not my decision, and I'm not here to piss on anybody's practice per se. I'm not here to piss on anyone's practice per se. But I'm John, and this is the Abracast, and thank you guys. I hope that you like this. This thread is going to go on. We're going to start getting into specific transcendental rituals and ending, I think, with and necromancy. So if you're digging these episodes, there's a lot more to come. Thank you guys. And I'm going to let Hilla tell you the rest of the bullshit.
Thank you for listening, and we hope that you enjoyed the show. Please send an email or find us on social media and let us know what you think about the show. We would appreciate it if you would give us a 5-star rate and review wherever you find your favorite podcasts. You can find Stigmata Studios, graphic, novels, and comic books. Take control of your destiny. Understand your past. Put your present in context and know your future with a twist. Check out the Abracast Tarot Card Deck. Your body is your temple, so let's make sure you got a badass t-shirt on it. Variety of cool occult themed t-shirts and other merch like stickers, wall art, mugs, and more. Welcome to the Red Archive. Get access to over 50 hours of archived episodes, more bonus audio, additional exclusive content. All this for only $1 a month. Are you interested in the occult, history, conspiracy, and violence? Learn more at Abracast.com.